Welcome to Ripple Effect Connection. I'm your host, Christy Hugic, and I'm so glad you're here with us today. Joining me is my good friend and co-host extraordinaire, Megan Rupp, founder of Primal Health Consulting, for this special deep dive episode on living ancestrally. Megan and I love this topic. Living ancestrally might be a new concept to you, but it's one that can revolutionize how we approach health. With so many conflicting messages and questions in the wellness space, are saturated fats good or bad? What about seed oils? Should we avoid red meat? What about the cholesterol myths that dominate Western medicine? It's hard to know who or what to believe, but we tend to overcomplicate things. What if the answers to these questions were simpler than we've been led to think? That's why we're thrilled to welcome Craig McCloskey to the podcast. Craig earned his Bachelor's of Science degree in Nutrition and Dietetics from Penn State, along with a minor in kinesiology. He's a master certified health coach and board certified in holistic nutrition. Now, as the global educator for ancestral supplements and a leader in the beef organ supplement movement, Craig shares his expertise in traditional and ancestral living with audiences around the world. In addition to being a wealth of knowledge, Craig is a popular figure on Instagram and YouTube, where he breaks down complex health topics into actionable insights. In this episode, he'll help us tackle myths about organ meats, saturated fats, cholesterol, seed oils, and he'll introduce us to the like helps like philosophy. You'll also learn how eating in alignment with nature's truest form and eliminating ultra-processed foods can transform your health from the inside out. The answers to all of this might be right under our noses, or more aptly, from nose to tail. Please note, this podcast does not constitute medical advice. Always consult a qualified health professional for guidance on the specific needs for your health issues. But without further ado, here's our conversation with Craig McCloskey. It is my pleasure to welcome to the podcast for the very first time, Craig McCloskey. And Craig, I'm so excited to have you. I've got you with me for your first one, and I've also got Megan Rupp, who many of you know from former podcasts. Megan comes on and helps me host some of these here and there. So Craig, Megan and I want to welcome you to the podcast.
I'm excited. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, this is a subject, Megan, I know you sort of like this subject, right?
I am obsessed with organ meats and all things primal, so I am excited for today. I think it's going to be great.
Yeah, we're going to have some fun. We're going to have some fun for sure. So, Craig, I really do start with everyone who joins this podcast with something that's rather simple but so important, our foundation, which is our why. Can you just kind of explain what ancestral living is and how to do it and why that's important to you?
Yeah, ancestral living is really just, to me, is the way that every living thing should be living. I mean, in tune with nature. It doesn't get more simplistic than that. But I think in our current culture today, we found a way for the first time ever in human history to remove ourselves from nature. I mean, that's in high-rise buildings. That's staring into screens rather than going out in the shade in the sun. That's eating fake ultra-processed foods rather than eating real foods, whether that's animal origin or plant origin. And so to me, that's just reconnecting to our human roots as simply as it can be. And so my why, how did I come to this and why am I passionate about this? I grew up living the standard American lifestyle like most people in America. And I was eating fast food a few days, 3-4 days out of the week. And I wasn't the healthiest kid. I missed a lot of school, elementary school. And I was just really sick. And I was never diagnosed with any kind of disease. I was a little overweight, but I was always an athlete. So in a way, I don't like to say that you can out-exercise a poor diet, but in a way I was mitigating some of the effects that my diet was having on me. And really what kind of led me to this, in college, I was a 2-sport college athlete. I was really athletic growing up. And ultimately what kind of led me on this path that I'm on today was my sophomore year of college at Penn State. I woke up one morning from my dad waking me up because I commuted from my parents' house, and he broke the news to me at like 6:30 in the morning that my uncle didn't wake up. He died of a massive heart attack. He was only 43 years young, and he left behind 2 kids under 10, his wife, who was my dad's sister, and really he just had a massive heart attack in his sleep. And that's what set me on the path that I'm on today, because I wanted to figure out why that happened to him. all the factors. And so at that time I was a nutrition major at Penn State because I already had a love for nutrition because I was in athletics, and that really led to me just kind of traveling all over the United States, whether that was Florida, California, DC, to live events and just hearing professionals speak on anything that I could get my hands on, read a lot of books, listened to a lot of podcasts. And what I learned in the outside world kind of conflicted with what I was learning in my nutrition courses at Penn State. So I really was at odds of what was going on. Like, are seed oils healthy? Is sugar healthy? Is animal foods healthy? Like, what's going on here? And that really kind of led me on a path to where I'm at today. And it really comes back to simplicity, ancestral living, just living in tune with nature.
Yeah. I mean, I have to just say first and foremost that I think that the why is just so incredibly important. And when it comes from a place of being able to help others live a healthier life, it's very inspirational. So I appreciate you sharing that with us. And I went to Penn State as well. So
no way.
Small world. Small world. Yep.
Well, and wait, I can add, I went to school with James Franklin.
Oh my gosh.
So I went to college with James Franklin. So this is a big Penn State party. So this is a big Penn State party.
When did you graduate?
I graduated in 2012. Yes, 2012. Okay. What about you?
I spent some time in the Air Force after high school, but I graduated in 2019. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
we won't talk about when I graduated from college. So that's when we get back. That's when we get back to the content.
Oh, goodness.
You can tell by how old James is, so you don't need me to say it. So if you know how old James is, he's the same year as me. So there you go.
That's why we're on our health journeys, to stay forever young.
Yeah.
That's right. Forever young.
Well, I would like to pick your brain, Craig, about, ultra-processed foods. It's something that we see quite often, and I think that this really can go into your why as well. It's the elephant in the room. It's these foods that have 5 or more ingredients, loaded with sugar, artificial ingredients, seed oils, like you mentioned, and they're everywhere. I see them in gyms. I see them in daycares, nursing homes. So can you speak a little bit more about why ultra-processed foods are so problematic in our society?
Yeah, I mean, they're in over 80% of the foods in the grocery store. I mean, you can just go up and down any aisle and foods are going to be lined with these ultra-processed foods. And so the way I kind of describe this is there's a difference between processed foods and ultra-processed foods, in my opinion. I mean, you can look at just cooking foods or fermenting foods. That's a form of processing that makes foods more bioavailable, the nutrients more bioavailable. It reduces some of the defense chemicals in certain foods. It pre-digests the food. But when you're ultra processing a food, you are taking something that was once in nature, whether that was like a field of wheat or corn, and you're turning that into, say, Lucky Charms. And that it's like you mentioned, 5 or more ingredients. Your biology really doesn't recognize it anymore. And it comes with a host. The science is very clear on this. There's so many problems with this. They're so easy to overeat. They trick the pleasure centers inside of our brains to make them hyper palatable. So yeah, we're getting calories when we eat these foods, and you can look at the back of any nutrition label and you can see the macronutrients and the marketing on the front we could talk about, but those can also be deceiving. But you're not really getting any micronutrients, vitamins and minerals that really help your body to become healthy. And that's what your body really needs, is micronutrients. Well, we're just eating a ton of empty calories really without any of these micronutrients. So they're super easy to overeat. But whereas if you're eating whole foods, plants or animal origins, it's hard to overeat a steak and vegetables because they're so nutrient dense that your body's full. But when we're chronically in a state of eating ultra processed foods, you can be very nutrient poor, and that can lead to a lot of health issues. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And it's interesting because I have clients, and I will hear, well, what if I overeat protein or fat? And I'm like, I would be impressed if you could overeat a nutrient dense food like a grass-fed steak. I would be very impressed on that.
Yeah, there's actually a study that came out recently in the journal Obesity that found that basically the more protein you eat in the morning, the less calories and less ultra-processed food you eat the rest of the day. So I'm always a fan of eating like a big protein-rich first meal of the day, whether that's 6 a.m. or 10 a.m., whatever, it tickles your fancy. I don't think I've ever said that before, so, but whatever works.
Everything.
Yes, whatever works for people, eat a lot of protein in the morning is what I'm a big fan of.
Well, Megan and I just did a podcast all about protein, Craig, so you would like it. Episode 1 of season 2 was all about protein. And I am, the response of the people who just had no idea that we need that much protein. So hopefully we can continue to get that message home. And then Megan, I know you want to talk about, the other thing we hear about all the time, and that red meat is bad. Red meat is bad. Red meat is bad.
You know me so well. That's exactly where we're headed next. It's my favorite topic. But, on that note, we see a lot of clients, and I help a lot of clients with hormonal imbalances, female clients specifically, hormonal imbalances, thyroid dysfunction, anemia, and they're so scared to bring in red meat and fat because of the belief that these foods now are unhealthy. So can you tell our listeners a little bit more about red meat, saturated fat, and how these are actually health foods and the science behind that?
Yeah. So this goes back, can go back to the early 1900s. And in my belief and what the science has shown is that animal foods, red meat, as long as it's, really high quality sourcing, is one of the healthiest foods. We could talk about organ meats here later in the podcast, but just going back and talking about where did this originate from, the belief that saturated fat, cholesterol is problematic, we can kind of break that up into two parts. Cholesterol, eating dietary cholesterol has never been shown to be problematic for people. It doesn't raise your cholesterol. Your body's just going to make more if you eat less of it. But saturated fat is a little bit different in the fact that it does raise LDL. This is low density lipoprotein. It's not cholesterol, but it carries cholesterol to the body. So a lot of, mainstream health professionals believe that the higher your LDL, the more at risk you are of heart disease. We can kind of break that down a little bit. But in the 1900s, before the 1900s, heart disease, all these other chronic diseases were relatively rare in society. But at the turn of the century, we started eating more sugar, more seed oils, becoming more sedentary, highly stressed, really living in a fast-paced world. And then you start to see all these chronic diseases rise. And heart disease was at epidemic proportions by 1920, killing hundreds of thousands of individuals, my uncle being one of those individuals 9 years ago. And so what really started this research was, how can we stop this? So in the 1940s, listeners might recognize the name Ancel Keys. He was kind of the face of this start of the diet heart hypothesis. Like, saturated fat is the culprit behind heart disease and stroke and all these other cardiovascular diseases. And so in the late 1940s, he started his first large-scale study called the 6 Countries Study. And what he did was he basically just traveled the globe for a couple years and found that the cultures that ate the most saturated fat had the highest rates of heart disease. Well, he left out 15 other studies, and basically other researchers were quick to point out that there were 22 countries of data from 22 countries available. And when you put all those countries on the map, they just didn't line up. There was countries eating very high amounts of saturated fat that had virtually no rates of heart disease. So the data wasn't there. So he was annoyed, and he did a follow-up study to that called the 7 Countries Study. This is a little bit more intensive. He traveled the globe again. This was in the early 1950s. I think this was 1956. He launched this study. And so in the 1960s, this came out, and basically he found that it was certain. There was a very strong association, not causal effect, but association, that the more red meat, eggs, animal foods, saturated fat that you ate, the higher your risk of cardiovascular disease went up. And so at this time, he joined forces with the American Heart Association, who just was receiving funding from Procter & Gamble, who created Crisco and vegetable oils. So there was a little bit of bias going on here. And this is in the 1970s. And then in the 1980s, so where we got our education from was from the dietary guidelines. They released their first ever dietary guidelines in 1980. This is my plate. This is the food guide pyramid. And so in this very first guidelines, it said to reduce your saturated fat, reduce your cholesterol, reduce sodium, all these other things. And so at that same time, ultra-processed foods were being put out into culture. Seed oils were really being pumped out into culture. Soybean oil increased by 1,000-fold since 1900. And heart disease pretty much continues to climb. Cancer, Alzheimer's, all these chronic diseases continue to skyrocket, even though we're eating less saturated fat, less butter, less red meat. Well, since then, since 2009, there have been 14 reviews of randomized controlled trials, and all of them have shown that saturated fat is not a problem when eaten in the context of a whole food diet, basically. And so that's kind of where we're at today, is that there was a lot of shady science, politics, money being done in the 1900s, and it basically is for profit for big food and big pharma to make more money, and it's at the expense of our health.
Yeah, and it's hard to sort through the agendas for people, the general person, right? Because, not going to mention names, but some people have large followings of on Instagram that are posting things about seed oils that are positive, and you're just going, okay, well, let me look at the connections here. And needless to say, there are some connections to some things that seed oils are part of. And so there's an agenda. So what we would want to tell people is that anybody can put a study out that kind of suits their narrative and whatever narrative they want to get across. So you said randomized control trials. Like, those are important, like randomized. What you have to actually look at the study that's being cited. So I know people at home are going, more work, more work, right? Because it's work. And that's, what we're here for. And hopefully you can find people that you trust to help you with this versus trying to sort through it all yourself. And one of those things that I think we have to help people sort through is organ meats, because the initial reaction is, ew, gross. No, I'm not doing this. Well, for those of you that maybe missed the intro or you're queuing this in further, Craig is part of Ancestral Supplements, and Ancestral Supplements, the idea is, yes, we want you to have an ancestral life, but sometimes it's hard to get those things, right? If you may not have access to grass-fed beef liver, and maybe you do need to supplement with it. And so organ meats are huge in this space. So I want you to stop what you're doing right now. Take off that face that you're making, because we're telling you about organ meats. And Craig, I want you to help dispel the myths that organ meats are gross and talk about these benefits and the history that's involved in eating organ meats.
Yeah. So when you look at virtually every healthy culture throughout time, both in the past and modern day, you see them consuming the whole animal nose to tail. And we think it's gross now because we didn't grow up with it. Our palates aren't adjusted to it. But it would have been a waste of calories and nutrients for cultures to just waste parts of the animal. Whereas cultures, we can look at modern day dishes, and there's recipes using liver in stews, or you can make it into like a ground beef and make it into a chili, which is what I like to do. But cultures have been doing this for a very long time, and these are some of the most nutrient dense foods in the world. They're just not that tasty right now because we didn't grow up on it, but there's cultures out there that consume these regularly that love the taste of them because they grew up on them. And so at Ancestral Supplements, we do a freeze-dried desiccation. Desiccation just means freeze-dried, to preserve most of the nutrients in the organs like liver, heart, pancreas, kidney, and spleen, among others, to retain all the nutrients, because we wanted to bridge that gap to people, because we understand it's hard for people that have never eaten liver or heart to go out there and, one, find it from a good farm, but then know how to cook it in recipes. Well, we wanted to be able to bridge that gap and to be able to provide people with these nutrients, because they are some of the most nutrient dense foods in the world. If we're talking about liver, this is really nature's multivitamin. It's going to contain a lot of good bioavailable vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin K2, choline, which is super important for fertility and pregnancy, zinc and iron. And they contain all these nutrients pretty much in the right ratios that our bodies know how to use them and absorb them. You can go and get a Centrum or a random multivitamin on the store shelf, and they're going to contain man-made synthetic nutrients, and your body's just going to pee it out. I took a random multivitamin like 10 or 15 years ago, and I had like orange neon colored urine. It was the weirdest, craziest thing. I didn't know much about nutrition then. But now I don't have that when I eat organ meats, because my body's actually absorbing all of them.
Yeah, and it's tell them just in general too, because I know you sort of touched on it, but I still want to go into it to hammer it home, the benefits of the organ meats. If you eat these, you don't need the Centrum. You don't, like, people will ask us all the time, and I think Megan concurs with this, is that people ask me all the time, what multivitamin do you take? And I say, I don't, I eat organ meat. I mean, that's my
I
answer.
tell them Ancestral.
Yeah.
Extra multivitamin. I tell my friends and family 6 capsules of liver from Ancestral.
Yeah.
Maybe the fish eggs too, Vitality or the grass-fed blood. They're all on my desk right now. So
Yeah, and I'll go into more too about my experience in the next question too, but I want you to hammer home for these people like, hey, if you can do this, we do have some clients and patients that get themselves to the point where they're eating like the ground meat blends, like Force of Nature, ground meat blends, and they're eating those. And I also would tell people, be very careful with your source for your organ meats if you're going to eat it, because that's really, really important. And that's why I think it's sometimes easier and more safe and to do it with regularity, to take the actual supplement, but give them more about what this because from an energy standpoint, like give them more benefits of what these organ meats will do.
Yeah, so cultures, they would preferentially go out of their way to feed, like from a fertility standpoint, they would feed expecting mothers and fathers these foods, liver and tallow, beef fat, and dairy, because they were full of all these nutrients that gave their bodies health. And that's the thing. When I talked about ultra-processed foods earlier, your body doesn't really know what to do with these ultra-processed ingredients. It doesn't have any nutrients. And same thing with a synthetic multivitamin. Your body just doesn't really know how to absorb some of these isolated nutrients, because your body expects whole foods in its complete form, because there's tens of thousands of nutrients in a whole singular food in liver. But we're just highlighting some of the major vitamins and minerals. But there's phytonutrients. There's a lot of different enzymes and cofactors that really go in, and listeners don't need to know. They just need to know my body expects to eat whole foods. And organ meats are the most nutrient dense foods. And you can combine that with muscle meats. And so for instance, muscle meats, like when I say muscle meats, I mean like a steak or a ground beef. They contain amino acids, proteins, in different ratios. But when you're eating organ meats, they contain more or different amino acids. So your body's eating this animal nose to tail. Your body's able to actually efficiently work, and it can really help with sleep. We're talking about amino acids that help with sleep, autoimmune issues, digestive issues, all these nutrients in whole foods that might not be in a random multivitamin are directly known to help with what I just mentioned and a host more of issues. So organ meats is like the foundation of places where I tell people to start with their diet. Get a little bit closer to a local whole food source, but if you can't or won't, then try a desiccated form, because that's the next best thing.
Yeah, and I think you're talking about, you said it earlier too. You were talking about ultra processed food, and like some of the problems that and Megan asked you about the red meat earlier and why people are afraid of it. Well, people have to understand too, a lot of that has to do with the sourcing again.
Yeah.
So to hammer that home, it's not the red meat that's grass-fed, grass-finished that's the problem. It's the conventional red meats you get in the store that maybe have antibiotics or maybe have nitrates. And so that's where the problem can occur, where the meats may not be beneficial because you're taking in all those other things. So we definitely preach sourcing, and that is one of the things I love about Ancestral. And now I know Megan and I want to get into something that the viewer or listener can, whichever you're doing, can relate to, which is a simple way to say, like helps like. Okay, so if like helps like, and you have a heart condition, it says you should eat heart, technically, when you say that. I have used pancreas because I was not secreting the right amount of pancreatic enzymes. I used the bone and marrow because I had osteoarthritis, and it's like helps like. I've used the ancestral blood to help with iron. So let's talk about if someone, say, has a certain condition. Let's say someone has a heart condition or a fatty liver. How can incorporating these supplements specifically benefit someone who may actually already have a diagnosed condition?
Yeah. Well, first, keep continuing to work with a well-trained doctor or medical professional. But we have on Ancestral supplements on Amazon, there's tens of thousands, over 60,000 5-star reviews on our products because people have taken these and it's helped them with their X condition. And so there's nutrients, like I mentioned, in certain organs. Heart has the highest source of CoQ10 that we know of. Well, where's CoQ10 in the human body? It's a lot of it's in the heart. And so when you're eating that heart, and this is what cultures have been doing for a very long time, if somebody had a weak heart, they would eat the heart of a very healthy animal, whether that was a bison or a cow, and it would help them recover. Thymus is located, right above the kind of collarbone here in your throat. That's what houses a lot of the immune system. So if somebody's struggling with colds or infections, eating, we have lamb thymus or sheep thymus and mixed with a little bit of beef liver in our product. There's a lot of reviews saying how much that's helped people with their allergies, their immunity and things like that. But this concept of like supports like is something that cultures have just been doing intuitively for a very, very long time, as long as humans have been consuming organ meats. And so, if you're struggling with, like you mentioned, a fatty liver, eating healthy liver from a cow can really be beneficial, along with doing other healthy lifestyle practices and probably reducing sugar and high fructose corn syrup and other things like that.
Yeah. Oh, I love this topic. Let's dig a little bit deeper on the like supports like. Mm-hmm. I really am a big fan of the hormonal support. You have the female enhancement mixture, the femme, the male optimization. So where did the idea for these come in? And can you talk more about who would benefit from utilizing the hormonal support supplements?
Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, cultures that did this for fertility, femme and MOFO, male optimization formula. These are both two products designed that have the reproductive organs of beef, of cows. So in the femme, I don't remember off the top of my head. I know there's like fallopian tubes, there's the ovaries, the uterus, and along with liver and bone marrow, I believe. And then in the male optimization formula, there's the testicle, there's the bone marrow, liver, and maybe a couple other ones in there. And so really, cultures have been doing this when they were expecting a pregnancy or a fertility. They would feed the humans, the woman or the man, these organs. And so there's a lot of good reviews on Amazon, actually. MOFO is really interesting because it contains the testicles, so it's going to actually contain testosterone. So if anybody out there is an athlete or that gets drug tested, I wouldn't consume the MOFO, because this could actually increase your testosterone to a significant level that might show up on a drug test. And so there's a good bit of reviews on Amazon of people taking MOFO that have increased their testosterone, and really just by changing this one thing. That's their N of 1. But yeah, that's kind of the birth of those, is just looking at what cultures have been doing for a long time and how can we incorporate that into a product that's also helping people, and the reviews have really spoken for themselves. One more that I'd like to mention is thyroid. We have a desiccated thyroid product. One of the first, thyroid products on the market was, I believe it was pig extract of thyroid, which, if anybody is on any type of thyroid medication, which a lot of people, millions of Americans are on a thyroid medication, that's kind of like just associating that is that, a pig extract of thyroid is used medicinally by Big Pharma, or at least it was. We're doing the same thing with our cow thyroid, and people actually that have thyroid conditions, whether that's Hashimoto's or an overactive, Graves or anything like that, they are able to. This is not across the board, but they are actually able to reduce their medications of like Synthroid or anything like that by working with their doctor. There's plenty of reviews on our website that shows how powerful whole foods can actually be.
Yeah, thank you.
And I think I can speak on the thyroid, at least connect the dots, right? Because Megan knows my situation, and like I was, I had my T3 was low, and I took a very good supplement from a supplement company that I respect a great deal, but it wasn't moving the needle. And what moved the needle for me was the grass-fed thyroid. So I do take that. I do take that every day, and I do think it's really, really helpful. So I want everyone to know, like, our purpose of doing this is not necessarily to do a commercial for Ancestral supplements, but what we're trying to say is that, and this is why I've always been involved, full disclosure, I'm an affiliate of Ancestral supplements because I believe in these things, and I believe in helping people get them. And the reason why I believe in it is because they work and they're simple. Like Craig said, they're not synthetic. So now that we've got them set on the supplement portion of this, what we want to do, and I know if you follow Craig on Instagram, which later on he's going to tell you how to do that, you will see the ancestral life in play. Okay. So Craig, let's give them some simple tips on how they can do this in everyday life, even if we're going back to some of the 9 tenets, ways that they can work this stuff into their everyday life and see the benefits.
Yeah. So you mentioned the tenets. So we have what's called the 9 ancestral tenets, and we didn't make this up. We didn't make up the tenets. The tenets, I'll just run through them quickly, but this is sleep, eat, move, shield, connect, cold, sun, struggle, and bond. And the listeners are probably like, okay, what do all these mean? So our ancestors and just every living thing, even, you can look deer or any living thing, they just live in nature, in tune with nature. And they live these tenets just every single day by default, by how they live their lives. Well, in our current world today, we found a way to convenience everything in our lives and remove ourselves from these tenets. So we can go through just a couple of these, but sleep was the first one. Well, we have the TV on, we're exposing ourselves to bright lights before we go to bed. We're not eating certain foods that help with sleep. We're highly stressed. We're doing all these things that impact our sleep quality. Whereas, cultures and animals, they sleep out under the stars or they find shelter. It's nice and cool usually. They sleep a certain way. And if we can just put our biology back into this environment that it expects, then we can have better sleep too. Moving on to eat, like I mentioned, we have been used to eating a certain diet, whether that is, all around the world, different cultures eat a different diet, a higher ratio of animals to plants, higher ratio of protein, fats, carbs. It depends on where you kind of evolved at. And so it's just eating a whole foods based diet, void of ultra processed foods. Move. We were designed to just move our bodies, but we are living in a sedentary culture today that really we're not moving much at all. We're not getting our steps in. But if we can just move a little bit every day, go on a walk in the sun, you're barefoot, then you're knocking out half the tenets right there. If you do it with a loved one, that's the last one, bond. That's the last ancestral tenet. So if you can just do that, that's a really easy way to put the ancestral lifestyle into practice.
Yeah. That's awesome. I mean, that's kind of what we preach and we talk about with our clients, like going back to basics. And there's incredible biohacking tools out there, and we're all for it, and Christy and I use them all the time. But a lot of times with our clients, we are talking about, well, what about the basics? Are you getting your nutrients in? Are you seeing the sun at all during the day? Do you have a supportive home life? So I love that you talked about these things, because too quickly we run ahead of ourselves into, a cold plunge or taking NAC. And these things aren't bad. They're wonderful, but it's the basics of living that healthier lifestyle. I just wanted to know if you could elaborate, because like Christy said, we've got a lot of listeners who are probably new to these things. So tell me, besides the liver, because that's a given, which of the ancestral products are your favorite? Like what's your favorite one to take and why?
This is funny. I get asked this a few times, and it changes from time to time depending on what season of life I'm in, what I'm going through. But I've been with the company 2.5 years, and I've been taking Ancestral since 2017, and I started working for them in early January of 2022. So my favorite ones have changed since then, but right now it's the colostrum. We have a powdered form and a capsule form, just because of all the incredible benefits that it has. And I like the mofo. That's always been a favorite of mine, just for, the male optimization aspect. And we just launched a protein powder that's bone broth, medicinal mushrooms like lion's mane, reishi, chaga, cordyceps, and it also has the organs in it: liver, heart, pancreas, spleen, and kidney. So I guess those are my top 3 favorites right now.
Those are awesome. Megan knows I'm a big fan of the protein powder. I think it's awesome. I have it every day. I think it's so good. And I want everyone to know too, and I know that we're going to talk with how people can connect with you, but I want people to know that one of the things I love the most about Ancestral, this is well before, I was probably already taking some of the things, but this is in a clinical setting. I had some questions about some things, and I would reach out to Ancestral and ask the question. I have never anywhere else gotten the level of explanation and detail on everything I've asked, and then some, from this company. So if you ever have questions and you need to reach out, you can reach out to Megan and I, because the chances are we probably dealt with it. You can probably reach out to Craig, but he's busy too. But he maybe, I don't know, Craig, maybe you're the one answering some of these on Ancestral, but the information you get back about why, because our patients were asking, what if I take the organ complex? Is that better than the liver? And like for what we're doing, we determined that the liver capsules are the best for what we do in this immediate specific clinical setting that I'm talking about. So if you ever have questions, this is the place to ask them, because they will explain it to you to the nth degree. And I love that. I like information. So Craig, let's let everyone know how they can connect with you, see your ancestral life in action, and also just connect with even ancestral supplements in general.
Yeah, I'm most active on Instagram at Craig_McCloskey. That's where you can find me. I have a website, CraigMcCloskey.com. You can see all my work there. I have all the other social media platforms as well. And Ancestral Supplements, we're on Instagram at Ancestral Supplements. And you mentioned our customer service. We call them tribe support, but they are phenomenal. I used to do that work a little bit before I got into the head of education side of things. And they really are like health coaches, and they do a ton of great work. And they really have, hundreds of email threads going with one singular customer talking about all their different health conditions and how, what products can help, and not just products, but lifestyle factors. And they really are good-hearted people that work our customer service. So if you have any questions, reach out to them. It's through our email on our website, but you can find us there. And we're recently on YouTube. You can find us at Ancestral Wisdom. We're on there hosting kind of our own shows and our own content that I help to run. So that's where you can find us.
Yeah, it's awesome. Megan and I now are probably going to corral you to come back too, because it's hard to hit everything in one podcast. We could probably do an entire podcast just on the 9 tenets.
Absolutely.
Really we could. So we are honored that you came to visit us. We hope you'll come back, Craig.
Absolutely. This is a lot of fun, especially with my Penn State fans over here.
Yeah, we are.
That's right.
That's a wrap for this episode of Ripple Effect Connection. We hope you enjoyed our closer look into ancestral living. We covered so much today, and we know it's new information for a lot of you. So if you'd like to learn more, please reach out to Craig, Megan, or myself on Instagram. You can find our contact info and handles inside of the show notes for this episode. Remember, this podcast does not constitute medical advice. The journey is all about discovering what works best for you, and please work with a qualified health professional to find out if this type of support is right for you. Thank you for listening. Next, spread the inspiration. Educate others about ancestral living and what you learned about these health myths that permeate our society. Like, follow, review, and share this podcast with others who may benefit from this information. Stay tuned for the next episode of Ripple Effect Connection. Let's create waves of change together.